Close your eyes. The rain is whispering tonight, and every drop carries a little piece of calm. Listen closely. The world outside has slowed to a tender hush, like the sky itself has taken a deep breath. The windows glow faintly with the last touch of evening, and the rhythm of the rain begins to wash away the noise that clings to the day. Each drop finds its way to the earth, soft and steady, as if the night is writing you a lullaby no one else can hear. You are safe here. The storm is gentle, the air warm and alive. Let the sound cradle your thoughts, the way waves cradle the shore. Back and forth, slower with each passing moment. There's nothing left to do, nowhere to be. Only this quiet, and the soft voice of the rain, guiding you toward peace. At the edge of the Midwest, where the land stretched into endless fields of corn, and the air smelled faintly of rain and cedar, there was a town so small that strangers often missed it on the map. Locals called it Maple Hollow. A single road led in, lined with aging oak trees that bowed slightly, as though they too were tired from watching over the same faces year after year. In the early mornings, fog gathered over the lake like a soft blanket, swallowing the fishermen and their tiny boats whole. By noon, the mist would lift, revealing mirrored water and skies so pale they seemed almost white. Evenings came quietly, the kind that slipped in unnoticed, painting every window gold before giving way to deep blue. It was the sort of place where everyone knew who owned the red truck parked outside the grocery, where pies cooled on porches, and where time felt slower, as if it too took its shoes off to rest. Elliot lived in a small wooden house on the northern edge of town, right where the fields met the forest. He was 12, tall for his age, with quiet eyes that noticed everything. His grandmother, Ruth, said he had an old soul, and maybe she was right. He didn't talk much, but he listened, really listened, to the hum of cicadas, the creak of floorboards, the sigh of the wind through the maple trees. Ruth was the heart of their little world. Her hair was silver, soft as smoke, always tied in a loose bun. Her hands smelled like flour and lavender soap. By day, she tended her garden, rows of herbs and wildflowers that spilled over the fence, like a secret she couldn't quite contain. At night, she told stories. And oh, how she told them. She spoke not like a performer, but like someone remembering something too beautiful or too terrible to keep to herself. Her stories drifted between truth and dream, of lanterns that never went out, of strangers who disappeared into fog, of whispers that came from old trees when no one was around to hear. Elliot never felt afraid when she spoke. Instead, he felt wrapped in something warm and strange, a feeling halfway between comfort and wonder. Ruth always ended her tales the same way. "You see, my dear, not all ghosts come to haunt, some come to heal." When she said it, her eyes would soften, as though she was speaking to someone long gone. Their nights followed a rhythm. The steady tick of the old clock, the chirping outside, the faint smell of pine from the forest beyond their window. The air would grow still, and Elliot would drift towards sleep. But sometimes, he would wake in the middle of the night, sensing something different. From his bed, he could see the cemetery on the hill. A quiet patch of land fenced by rusted iron and wild ivy. It wasn't far, just beyond the maple grove. There was one thing about it that always caught his eye. A light, faint, golden, unwavering, like a lantern that refused to go out. At first, Elliot thought it was a caretaker making rounds, or maybe a trick of the moonlight. But the light was always there, even on nights with no moon, even when the rain came down hard enough to blur the world into streaks. He mentioned it once to Ruth, one evening as she tucked him in. "Grandma," he said softly, "why does the lantern in the cemetery never go out?" Ruth paused, her eyes drifting to the window. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. "Ah," she whispered, "so you've seen it too." Her voice carried no fear, only a strange tenderness, like someone remembering an old song. "That light's been burning longer than I've been alive. she continued. "No one knows who tends it. Some say it's a trick of the fog. Others say it's the spirit of the first keeper of the graveyard, still watching over the souls who rest there." Elliot tilted his head. "Do you believe that?" Ruth smiled faintly. "I believe some things don't need to be explained to be real." Outside, the crickets sang louder, and the lantern beyond the window flickered once, as though acknowledging her words. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He watched the light for hours, its glow steady, gentle, alive. It didn't feel like something to fear. It felt familiar. As the clock struck midnight, a thin layer of mist rolled through the fields, and the lantern shimmered softly through it. The boy's eyelids grew heavy, and just before he drifted off, he thought he saw something. A shadow moving slowly near the light, as if someone was walking with it. The next morning, he woke to the smell of pancakes and rain. Ruth hummed softly in the kitchen, her back to him. Everything was as it should be. Warm, safe, ordinary. But through the window, the cemetery glowed faintly in the distance. Even under the gray daylight, the lantern burned on. Elliot wondered then, maybe the light wasn't there to frighten the living. Maybe it was there to remind them that not every darkness means the end of things. Sometimes it's just where the light begins. That evening, after supper, Elliot sat by the window again. The sky outside glowed the soft pink of fading day, and the air carried the faint, sweet scent of wet grass. Fireflies had begun to drift lazily over the yard, their light pulsing like slow heartbeats. He liked this hour best. The in-between time, as Ruth called it. Not quite day, not yet night. "It's when the world holds its breath," she often said. "When everything listens." And tonight, the world seemed to be listening. Far across the fields, at the edge of the cemetery, the lantern burned as it always did. Small, steady, gold. It was not a harsh or flickering light. It shimmered gently, like honey underwater, and even from a distance, Elliot thought it seemed alive. There was something different about it tonight, though he couldn't say what. The glow felt stronger, somehow closer. He pressed his hand against the cold glass of the window. "Grandma," he called softly, "is it true the lantern's been burning forever?" Ruth looked up from her knitting chair, her silver hair catching the firelight. "Forever's a long time, dear," she said, smiling. "But yes, no one remembers when it began. The elders used to tell stories about it when I was your age." "What kind of stories?" Ruth set down her knitting. The air between them seemed to hush again. Outside, a cricket stopped mid-song, as though it too was listening. "They said the lantern was first lit by the cemetery keeper, long, long ago. A kind man who tended the graves with his own hands. He lived in a small cabin near the maple trees and promised never to let the dead rest in darkness. So each night he would light the lamp, no matter the weather." "And what happened to him?" Elliot asked. Ruth hesitated. Just a heartbeat too long. "One winter," she said slowly, "a terrible storm rolled in from the lake. The snow fell for days. When it cleared, the townsfolk found his cabin empty. The keeper was gone. But the lantern," she pointed toward the hill, "the lantern was still burning." Elliot's breath caught. "No one saw him again?" Ruth shook her head. "Not once. But sometimes, on very cold nights, people say they see a figure walking near the light. Tall, wearing an old coat, carrying a shovel. Always silent. Always alone." She chuckled softly, trying to break the spell she'd just woven. "But those are just stories, my dear. Old towns love their ghosts." Elliot smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed fixed on the glow. Something about it stirred a quiet ache in him. Not fear, but longing. It was as if the lantern wasn't just lighting the graves. It was waiting for something. Or someone. Later that night, as Ruth turned off the lights and the house fell into its familiar silence, Elliot found himself unable to sleep. The soft tick of the clock mingled with the rustle of wind through the trees. He crept out of bed and moved to the window again. Outside, the cemetery lay still, blanketed in silver mist. The lantern glowed brighter than he'd ever seen before, steady, golden, unshaken even by the faint drizzle that had begun to fall. Then, as lightning flickered far in the distance, he saw it, just for an instant. A figure standing beside the lantern. Tall, motionless. The shape of a man. Elliot blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the light remained, golden and calm, as if nothing had ever been there. He drew the blanket closer around his shoulders. His heartbeat slowed again, lulled by the steady glow. Somehow, even after what he'd seen, he didn't feel afraid. Instead, he whispered, "Good night, Lantern Keeper." The rain tapped softly against the window, and in the distance, the golden light seemed to flicker once in reply. The fog came rolling in just after midnight, thick, silver, and slow, wrapping the town in silence. It pressed softly against the windows, swallowing the moonlight until only a faint golden hue remained from the faraway lantern. Elliot couldn't sleep again. The quiet was too deep, too heavy. From somewhere beyond the glass, the wind began to hum. Not a howl, not a cry, but something that almost sounded like words. He sat up, heart steady but alert, and listened. The sound drifted through the night like breath through a flute. "Do not fear. What waits beyond the light?" The words brushed past him, light as mist. For a moment he thought it was Grandma Ruth murmuring in her sleep. But when he peeked into her room, she was resting peacefully, her breathing slow and even. He turned back toward the window. The fog had grown thicker, a slow-moving ocean of white. And at its heart, faint but unwavering, burned the lantern. Elliot stepped closer, drawn by something he didn't understand. He lifted his gaze to the old mirror above the dresser, its surface catching the faint glow from outside. And there, in the reflection, he saw him. A man. Old, stooped slightly, with kind eyes that shimmered like candlelight. Standing not in the room, not behind Elliot, but behind the lantern itself, half a mile away in the graveyard. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood beside the light, his hand resting on its base, as though guarding it from the night. Elliot blinked once, twice. The image rippled, like a stone dropped in water. When it cleared, the figure was gone. Only the lantern remained, golden and still. The whisper came once more, softer this time, almost tender. "Do not fear." Elliot exhaled slowly, and somehow he didn't. Outside, the fog curled gently around the trees, and the golden light flickered, steady, protective, as though the keeper himself had nodded in silence. The town lost power just after sundown. At first, it was only a flicker, the brief dimming of lamps, the sigh of the old refrigerator, then silence. The radio in the kitchen faded mid-song, replaced by the soft, growing sound of rain against the roof. The air felt thicker, closer, filled with the scent of damp wood and earth. Ruth lit a single candle on the table, the flame trembling as if uncertain it belonged in such deep darkness. "It'll be back soon," she said, though even she didn't sound convinced. Elliot nodded, but his attention had already drifted toward the window. Beyond the blurred glass, the fog had returned, heavier than ever, swallowing the distant cornfields whole. The only thing that broke the gray was that same golden shimmer, the lantern, still glowing at the far edge of the cemetery. No matter what happened, storms, wind, snow, it never went out. He thought of the whisper from nights ago, that voice like breath through wind. "Do not fear what waits beyond the light." Maybe it wasn't meant to scare him. Maybe it was calling him. Ruth soon went to bed, her candle cupped in both hands as she disappeared down the hall. The house grew quieter. Only the soft patter of rain and the slow tick of the old wall clock remained. Elliot sat in the dark, feeling something stir inside him. Not bravery exactly, but a kind of longing, a curiosity that pulsed like a second heartbeat. He found his flashlight, slipped on his coat, and stepped outside. The air was cold and wet, pressing against his cheeks. The grass shone with dew, and the fog curled around his ankles like living breath. Each step made a soft, sucking sound in the mud. From here, the lantern looked closer than it ever had. A steady drop of gold in the ocean of white. He followed it. As he crossed the dirt road, the mist thickened. The trees became silhouettes, their branches like reaching hands. Somewhere in the distance, wind passed through the rows of gravestones, carrying a low, hollow sound that almost resembled a hymn. Elliot paused beside the gate of the cemetery. Its iron bars were cold beneath his fingers, damp with fog. He hesitated, only for a moment, before pushing it open. The hinges groaned softly, a voice of their own in the quiet night. Inside, everything glowed faintly in the lantern's reflection. The marble crosses, the curved angel wings, the stone vases filled with wilted flowers. He moved slowly, listening. The crunch of gravel, the whisper of leaves, the far-off drip of water from a cracked angel statue. He reached the center path, and there it was. The lantern sat atop a weathered post beside an old oak tree, its glass fogged and streaked with age. The flame inside moved like liquid sunlight, swaying gently in the night breeze. Elliot stood a few feet away, heart steady but wide open. The light painted his face in amber warmth, melting the cold from his hands. For a long time, he simply watched. There was something sacred in its stillness. Not haunting, not eerie, but peaceful. Like the world had gone quiet to let this single flame speak. He whispered, almost to himself, "You really never go out, do you?" A breeze stirred the leaves. The flame bent sideways, as if nodding, and for a moment he felt it again. That strange, gentle presence, standing just beyond the edges of the light. A warmth that wasn't fire, a calm that wasn't silence. It didn't feel like walking into danger. It felt like walking into a dream that wasn't his. He took one more step closer. The lantern's glow reflected faintly in his eyes, and for the briefest instant, it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Then, from somewhere behind him, came the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pressing softly into wet earth. Elliot froze. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. He turned, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The beam cut through the mist in pale ribbons, but there was no one there. Only the fog swirling gently like breath. The light of the lantern flickered once, then steadied again, and when Elliot looked back at it, he thought he saw, just for a heartbeat, the faint outline of a hand resting on the glass. Not his, not anyone's he could explain. He blinked. The hand was gone, but the warmth remained. The rain had stopped, and the wind had softened. The flame burned steady, patient, alive. And though he could have sworn he was alone, he felt, deep down, that something old and kind had walked beside him all the way there. Elliot stood before the lantern, its light spilling across the mist like a warm breath in cold air. The world had grown utterly still. No wind, no crickets, not even the sound of dripping water from the old angel statue. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady, blending with the faint crackle of the lantern's flame. Then, the silence shifted. A sound rose from behind him. Not footsteps this time, but the faint rasp of fabric brushing against stone. Elliot turned, his flashlight trembling in his grip. At first, he thought it was the fog playing tricks again. But slowly, out of the swirling gray, a shape began to form. Tall, thin, wrapped in a long, weathered coat that seemed woven from shadow and moonlight. An old man stood a few paces away, his posture slightly bent but graceful, his eyes glowing with the same golden warmth as the lantern itself. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt thick with a kind of ancient calm, as if time itself had paused to listen. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, soft and low, like wind moving through dry leaves. "You found it," Elliot swallowed, his throat dry. Are you? The man smiled faintly, finishing the question for him. The keeper? Elliot nodded. The old man tilted his head slightly, studying him with eyes that seemed to see much further than the night. Name's Fade, he said. But yes, that is what they called me once. He stepped closer, and the lantern's light seemed to brighten around him, painting his face in warm gold. His features were sharp, but kind. The sort of face you might pass on a quiet street and never forget. The living forget, he said softly. But I remember for them. Elliot frowned. Remember what? The old man looked out toward the rows of graves. Those who lost their way home. The words lingered in the air like a prayer. Elliot followed his gaze. The fog had thinned just enough for him to see the faint outlines of headstones, each one glowing gently in the lantern's light. He felt a shiver, not from fear but from something deeper, a quiet sorrow he didn't fully understand. The man crouched beside the lantern, adjusting the wick with a careful hand. They rest easier when the light is kept. It reminds them they're not forgotten. Are they ghosts? Elliot asked, his voice small. The keeper smiled, but there was sadness in it. Ghosts are only stories the living tell when they can't explain the silence. What they are, he said, tapping the side of the lantern gently, is memory, and memory needs tending. Elliot watched as the flame steadied, its glow casting soft rings across the wet stones. Do you live here? I did, the old man said. And I suppose, in a way, I still do. His coat stirred faintly, though there was no wind. The mist seemed to move with him, parting slightly as he stood. Elliot's eyes caught a faint shimmer near the keeper's boots, like light passing through glass. For a second, he thought he could see the grass through him, but the thought slipped away as quickly as it came. Why does it never go out? Elliot asked. The keeper looked at him, a warmth in his gaze that made the boy's chest ache. Because some promises, he said quietly, are too old to break. He straightened, placing one hand gently on the lantern. Go home, young one. The fog isn't kind to those still breathing. It whispers things it doesn't mean to. But, Elliot began. The man's eyes softened. You will see me again. When it's time. A gust of wind swept through the graves, carrying the scent of damp leaves. Elliot blinked against the mist, shielding his face for just a second, and when he looked again, the keeper was gone. Only the lantern remained, its light steady and kind. The fog around it glowed faintly gold, and though the night was cold, Elliot felt warmth against his skin, like an invisible hand resting on his shoulder, guiding him back toward home. As he walked away, the keeper's words echoed softly behind him, fading into the wind. The living forget, but I remember for them. The mist thickened around Elliot like a living thing. The lantern's glow pulsed softly beside him, pushing back the gray just enough for him to see where he was. Rows of weathered stones, each name half swallowed by moss. The keeper walked a few steps ahead, his lantern casting long shadows that wavered like memories. Elliot followed, unsure why his heart beat faster now. Something in the air had changed. A quiet that felt too heavy, like the moment before thunder. Then, he saw it. At the base of an old oak tree, half hidden beneath curling leaves, stood a gravestone newer than the rest. Its marble was pale, almost glowing in the lantern light. For a moment, Elliot felt drawn to it, a strange pull in his chest, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He knelt and brushed the dust away. The name carved into the stone made his breath catch. Elliot Carter, 2001-2013. His fingers trembled. The chill of the stone seeped into his skin. That's my name, he whispered. The keeper said nothing. His lantern flame flickered once, then steadied again, its golden heart unwavering. Elliot's voice broke into the stillness. "This can't be real." He blinked, and the moment his eyes met the inscription again, the letters began to fade. Slowly, as though the mist itself was swallowing them whole, until only smooth marble remained. No name, no date, just emptiness. Elliot stumbled back, heart hammering. The fog seemed to breathe, curling closer, whispering his name in a voice that was both his own and not his own. The keeper finally spoke, his tone neither sad nor comforting, only knowing. Sometimes the line between the living and the lost is thinner than we think. The wind stirred. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolled once, low and hollow. Elliot looked down again. The stone was blank. Yet in its reflection of the lantern light, he thought he saw the faint outline of a boy standing beside an old man. Both waiting, both unsure which side of the light they truly belonged to. They sat beside the lantern, its soft gold flicker brushing against the stone angels and leaning crosses like a heartbeat that refused to fade. The fog had thinned, just enough for Elliot to see the outlines of the graves, each one a name, a memory, a whisper from before he was born. The keeper rested his hands on the lantern's handle, the metal worn smooth by decades of touch. His voice drifted into the air, gentle as the wind. "You asked who the light is for," he said. "It's for those who lost their way home." He turned slightly, his pale eyes catching the glow. "Do you want to hear their stories?" Elliot nodded, pulling his knees close. The night was cold, but he felt no fear now. The cemetery no longer seemed haunted, only hushed like it was listening too. The keeper began. "The soldier," he said, "was the first I ever guided. He told of a man who came home from war but could not cross the threshold of his house. His family had moved on, his old room turned into a guest chamber. The world he fought for had forgotten his name. So he wandered here," the keeper said softly, "searching for a place where someone still remembered." "What happened to him?" Elliot asked. "I lit the lantern," the old man replied. "And when he saw its glow, he wept. The next morning, the grass on his grave grew green again. That's how I knew he'd found peace." Next came the bride. She had died on her wedding night, her carriage overturned in the rain. Every year, on the night she should have danced, her veil would appear near the gate, white, trembling in the wind. "She stayed," the keeper said, "because she never got to say goodbye." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "One night, I left the lantern burning bright and whispered, 'He forgave you.' She vanished with the dawn." Elliot's heart tightened. Did he really forgive her? The keeper looked at the flame. He did, once he saw the light. And then came the child. A boy no older than Elliot himself, lost during a winter storm, never found until spring. His mother would visit this place every week, laying a toy beside an unmarked patch of earth. One night, the keeper said, the boy appeared beside her, not in body, just light. She couldn't see him, but she smiled. Some part of her must have felt it. Elliot swallowed. "That's sad." The keeper nodded. "Yes, but sadness isn't the same as sorrow. Some things are meant to ache a little. That's how we remember." They sat in silence for a while. The lantern hummed softly, its flame steady, as if it too had listened to the stories. Elliot finally asked, "Why do you remember for them?" The keeper's gaze lifted toward the stars, faint behind the fog. "Because the living forget," he said, "and the forgotten need someone to hold their names a little longer." Elliot looked around the graves again. He no longer saw death, only stories, unfinished, waiting to be spoken aloud. When he looked back at the keeper, something about him seemed almost transparent, not ghostly, but lighter, like a man halfway between presence and memory. And as the wind carried the faintest hum through the trees, Elliot realized. The lantern didn't just light the way for the dead. It lit the path for anyone who had ever felt lost. That night, the fog returned, soft as breath, curling between gravestones like it had been waiting for them. Elliot sat beside the keeper again, the lantern flickering quietly between them. The flame leaned and stretched, as if sensing something restless in the dark. Then it happened. A distant sound, low, trembling, rolled through the air. The church bell from the hill began to ring. Once, twice, then again, slow and mournful. Yet the town had no reason to toll it. The church had been closed for years. The ropes were cut long ago. Elliot's head lifted. "Do you hear that?" The keeper didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the flame, his expression unreadable. The golden light reflected in his pupils, turning them almost liquid. Finally he whispered, "Yes, one of them is leaving tonight." The bell continued, deep, steady, echoing across the open fields. Each note seemed to reach through the fog, pulling threads of light toward the sky. Elliot shivered. "Leaving? You mean?" The keeper nodded once. "When the bell rings, it means a soul has found its way home. They don't always need me. Sometimes the light calls them by itself." For a long moment, they sat without speaking. The sound of the bell grew softer, fainter, until only the echo remained. Then, as if responding, the lantern flame quivered, not dimming, but swaying, like it bowed in farewell. A warm gust of wind swept through the cemetery. It carried the faint scent of pine and rain, though no storm had passed. The fog parted gently, revealing a narrow path of light leading up the hill. Elliot thought he saw a figure there, faint, glowing, walking slowly toward the horizon. It didn't frighten him. In fact, it felt peaceful. The figure turned once, as if smiling at them, before dissolving into the mist. The old man bowed his head. "She was the bride," he murmured. She finally believed he forgave her. Elliot's chest tightened. "You knew it was her?" The keeper smiled faintly. "The lantern always knows before I do. It burns different, softer, kinder when someone's ready. When..." The flame steadied again, glowing with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, Elliot noticed that its light wasn't yellow like ordinary fire. It was warmer, a color between gold and memory. He whispered, "It's beautiful." The keeper nodded. "It's what hope looks like when it learns to let go." Another gust of air brushed past them. It wasn't cold. It felt almost like a hand, gentle and grateful. The trees rustled, the fog swirled once more, and then the night returned to stillness. No more bells, no more voices, just the heartbeat of the lantern, patient and eternal. Elliot leaned against the old man's shoulder, suddenly sleepy. The warmth of the light lulled him like a lullaby. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, and then even that sound faded. "Do they all leave eventually?" he murmured. The keeper's answer came soft and low. "Only when they're ready. The living, too." Elliot's eyelids fluttered. The flame shimmered through his dreams like sunlight through water. And above the quiet graves, the lantern glowed on, small, steadfast, and alive, while the last echo of the bell drifted upward into the stars. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the lace curtains, painting pale gold over the kitchen walls. The smell of cinnamon toast filled the air, warm, familiar, grounding. Elliot sat at the table, his thoughts still fogged with the memory of last night's bells. While his grandmother hummed softly by the sink, he wandered into the living room. Old photo frames lined the mantel, frozen smiles, sepia faces, bits of history behind glass. He'd seen most of them before, except one. It was a faded black and white picture tucked slightly behind a vase of dried lavender. Something about it made him stop. Two figures stood in front of the old cemetery gate. A young woman in a summer dress, smiling shyly, and beside her, the lantern, and the man holding it. The man, Elliot's breath caught. The tall frame, the coat, the kind eyes lit from within. It was the keeper. The same man he had met just hours ago. But here, in this photo, he looked younger, yet somehow unchanged. "Grandma?" Elliot called softly, his voice uncertain. Ruth turned, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw what he was holding, the color drained slightly from her face. "Oh," she whispered, walking closer. "You found that old thing." Elliot pointed to the man. "Who is he?" She hesitated, eyes glistening with a strange mix of fondness and grief. "That's Samuel Reed," she said finally. "He kept the lantern after the war, made sure the cemetery stayed tended." Elliot blinked. "But I saw him last night. He talked to me." Ruth's gentle smile faltered. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "Samuel died long before you were born." The words hung in the air, still and heavy. Elliot looked back at the photograph, at the man's steady gaze, the same eyes that had watched him through the mist. The light in the photo seemed to flicker faintly, though no breeze stirred the room. Ruth touched the edge of the frame, her fingers trembling. "He was a kind man," she murmured. "Never left his post, even after death." Elliot said nothing. But deep inside, he knew she was right. Because last night, in the fog, Samuel Reed had still been keeping watch. Night after night, the path to the cemetery became familiar beneath Elliot's small, careful steps. What had once been a place of unease now felt like a secret garden, quiet, kind, alive with whispers that no longer frightened him. The fog was softer now, its edges silvered by the moon. The wind that used to moan through the gravestones seemed to hum instead, a low, contented tune. Every night the lantern's glow waited for him beyond the iron gates, like a heartbeat that never stopped. Samuel Reed would already be there, sitting on the stone bench, his long coat brushed with dew. Sometimes he'd be polishing the lantern glass with a cloth so worn it looked like smoke. Other times he'd be humming an old hymn no one remembered. "Come," Samuel would say gently. "It's time to learn." Elliot would kneel beside him, the cool earth damp beneath his knees. Samuel showed him how to trim the wick just enough so the flame breathed softly. Not too bright, not too dim. "You see," the old man said, "a flame that burns too hot scares away the lost, but one that burns too weak can't guide them home." Elliot nodded, watching the blue-green smoke rise in thin, curling threads. The scent of old oil, ash, and pine filled the air, sharp, yet soothing. It was a smell he'd begun to associate with peace. He practiced lighting the lantern each night, his hands trembling less every time. The first spark always made him flinch. The second filled him with wonder. The flame would bloom, golden and steady, dancing inside the glass like something alive. "Every light," Samuel said one evening, "is a promise. You don't need to see who it's for, just keep it burning. Someone, somewhere, will find their way." Elliot looked up at him. "Were you ever afraid?" Samuel smiled, faintly. "Only once, the night I forgot that even the living can be lost." The words lingered, heavier than the mist. Elliot didn't understand them fully, but he felt their weight. The sadness beneath them, quiet as the flicker of flame. Between lessons, they would sit in silence. The night was filled with small sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle tapping of a branch against a headstone, the steady hiss of oil feeding fire. It was the language of the lantern, slow, patient, eternal. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, Elliot thought he heard other voices too. Faint laughter, a sigh, a whisper carried across the mist. But Samuel never seemed alarmed. He would only look toward the sound and nod, as if greeting old friends. One night, as Elliot leaned close to the flame, he noticed how its light touched Samuel's face. The lines seemed to soften, the years to fade. For a heartbeat, he looked almost young, like the man in the photograph. Does it ever go out? Elliot asked quietly. Samuel's eyes shimmered like amber glass. Not while someone remembers. And as the flame swayed between them, one mortal, one ghost, Elliot realized that perhaps remembering was its own kind of prayer. Each night he stayed longer, sometimes until dawn, sometimes until the morning fog thinned and the first birds began to sing. The lantern would burn through it all, faithful and calm. And every morning, when he returned home, his grandmother would be asleep in her rocking chair, a faint smile on her lips, as though the peace of the cemetery had reached her dreams. Elliot began to understand then. The lantern didn't just light the dead, it warmed the living too. And so, night after night, he kept returning, not out of fear, but devotion. The light had become part of him, glowing quietly behind his ribs, guiding him even when he wasn't near it. He was no longer the boy who had feared the fog. He was learning to walk within it, to see beauty where others saw shadow. And somewhere in that misty graveyard, Samuel Reed, the man who never left, smiled with something close to pride. One night, when the fog seemed gentler than usual, Elliot and Samuel sat side by side on the stone bench, watching the lantern flame ripple in its glass. The boy had grown used to the rhythm of the cemetery, the steady pulse of quiet, the whisper of grass brushing against the graves. Yet that evening, something felt different. The wind carried a hollow stillness, the kind that made the heart listen harder. Elliot turned to Samuel, who sat motionless, his hands folded over the handle of the lantern. The old man's profile was carved in gold light, calm and solemn. Elliot hesitated before asking, "Aren't you ever afraid to be here, alone?" Samuel's eyes didn't leave the flame. For a moment, it seemed as though he hadn't heard. Then, his lips curved into a faint smile, one touched with sadness. "The dead don't frighten me," he said softly. "It's the living who forget." Elliot blinked. "Forget what?" "Kindness," Samuel murmured. "Mercy. How to look at one another and see something worth saving." His voice drifted into the mist, low and steady. "I've watched many souls wander here. Most of them were never cruel. They were simply forgotten. No one came to light a candle, to whisper a name. That's when fear grows, Elliot. Not from death, but from being left behind by the living." The boy's chest tightened. "So, the lantern is to help them not feel forgotten?" "Yes," Samuel nodded. "And to remind the living, too. This light doesn't burn just for those beneath the earth. It burns for everyone who's lost their way above it." Elliot watched the flame carefully. It flickered once, then steadied, as if acknowledging Samuel's words. He whispered, "I think I understand." The old man glanced at him, and for the first time, Elliot thought he saw something almost human in his eyes. Tiredness? Yes, but also tenderness. "Fear," Samuel said, "isn't always the enemy. It's what reminds you that something still matters." A gust of wind passed through, rattling the leaves. The flame leaned, but didn't go out. Samuel rose slowly and adjusted the lantern's handle. "The living fear the wrong things," he added. "They fear shadows, not silence. Spirits, not solitude, but forgetting. Forgetting is what truly haunts." The boy looked out over the field of stones, the names carved deep into marble. Some were cracked and weathered, others so old they had lost their letters entirely. He thought of how quiet they all seemed, waiting. "Then maybe," Elliot said softly, "as long as we remember, no one's really gone." Samuel's gaze warmed. "Exactly." They stood in silence, two small figures in an ocean of mist and memory. The lantern's glow cast long, trembling lines across the grass, touching every grave, every name. In that moment, Elliot no longer felt the chill of fear, only a strange, delicate peace. The night was full of ghosts, perhaps, But none of them were cruel. They were only stories, waiting to be remembered. And as the light swayed between them, the old man whispered, almost to himself, "You see, boy, fear fades where kindness begins." The next night, the fog came early, thick, heavy, swallowing sound. It rolled down from the hills like a slow tide, covering fences, trees, even the road itself. Elliot held his flashlight close, though its beam could barely pierce the haze. He knew the path by heart now. Each crooked stone, each curve of iron gate. But when he reached the cemetery, something was wrong. The bench was empty. The lantern still burned beside it, steady, golden, unwavering. But Samuel Reed was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Reed?" Elliot called softly, his voice muffled by fog. "It's me, Elliot." Silence. Only the faint hiss of the flame answered him. He stepped closer. The lantern glass glowed warmly against his hand. The flame was strong, alive, but there was no oil inside. He tilted it slightly. The wick burned clean, untouched by smoke. It shouldn't have been possible. Elliot's heart began to pound. He looked around, searching for footprints in the dew, a sign of the man's long coat, his careful steps. But there were none. Even the fog seemed thicker than usual, pressing close, soft as breath, almost alive. "Samuel?" His voice trembled this time. Nothing. The trees loomed like dark silhouettes, their branches curling in the mist. The gravestones faded one by one until the whole cemetery looked like it was being erased. The only thing that remained was the light, suspended in a sea of white. Elliot stood beside it, listening. Somewhere far off, maybe in his imagination, he thought he heard the faint toll of a bell. Just one note, low and final. He touched the lantern again. It was warm, warmer than ever before. A whisper stirred through the fog, gentle and familiar. "Keep it burning, boy." Elliot froze. The voice was Samuel's, faint, like wind through leaves. Then it was gone. The fog thickened once more, closing around the light. The graves, the trees, the path, all vanished into white. And there, in the middle of it all, Elliot stood alone beside the eternal flame, the last keeper of the lantern that refused to die. The storm came without warning. All afternoon the sky had been heavy, gray, swollen, waiting. By dusk, the first low rumbles rolled over the cornfields like distant drums. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, and the scent of rain filled the air, sharp and metallic. By the time night fell, the heavens broke open. Thunder tore through the silence. Lightning splintered across the hills, and sheets of black rain poured down over the town. Power lines flickered once, then died. The whole valley went dark. Every window, every street light, every porch lamp vanished, swallowed by shadow. Every light, except one. Through the downpour, Elliot saw it from his window. The faint golden pulse of the lantern in the cemetery, trembling against the storm. His heart lurched. The lantern. It's still burning. Then came the thought that made his stomach twist. What if it goes out? He didn't know why it mattered so much, only that it did. That light wasn't just Samuel's anymore. It was his. A promise. A heartbeat in the dark. He grabbed his raincoat, flashlight, and boots. The wind screamed the moment he opened the door, slamming rain into his face. The world outside had become a blur of silver water and black trees. "Elliot!" Ruth's voice called from behind him, fearful, half asleep. "I'll be back, Grandma," he shouted, already running. The fields were rivers now. Mud pulled at his feet as he stumbled through the storm. Each flash of lightning revealed the distant iron gate, twisted and ghostly, just barely visible through the torrent. "Hold on," he whispered to the light, as though it could hear him. The rain came sideways, thick as nails. The wind howled through the trees, bending them low until they groaned. Elliot's flashlight flickered, then went out entirely. He pushed forward by memory alone, slipping on wet grass, catching himself on the old stone wall. When he reached the gate, it swung open with a scream of rust, pushed by the gale. The cemetery beyond looked alive. Graves gleaming wet, flowers torn from their stems, marble angels crying black streaks of rain. And there it was, the lantern. It swung wildly from its hook near the oak tree, the flame inside thrashing like a living thing. Lightning cracked above it, blinding white. For a moment, the lantern's glass caught the light and threw it back, scattering gold through the misting rain, like the last spark of the sun before it drowned. "Please don't go out," Elliot whispered, his voice breaking against the wind. He rushed forward, shielding it with his body, the rain stinging his face and neck. His hands trembled as he gripped the handle. It was burning hot, even in the cold storm. The wick was sputtering now, fighting for air. The flame danced frantically, each gust of wind threatening to kill it. Elliot hunched lower, wrapping both arms around it. Come on, come on. A deafening crack split the sky. A tree near the gate exploded in a burst of sparks and splinters. The ground shook beneath his knees. For a second, the world went white. Then, silence. He blinked, dazed, his heart hammering. The rain still poured, but the sound felt distant, muffled. He looked down. The lantern still burned, impossibly steady in his hands, as if the storm itself bowed before it. Elliot let out a shaky breath, tears mixing with the rain. "You're still here," he whispered. Somewhere deep in the thunder, he thought he heard a voice. Faint, familiar. "Keep it burning, boy." He held the lantern high, and its light spread across the flooded graves like a golden tide, wrapping the cemetery in warmth. And for the first time, the storm didn't feel like chaos. It felt alive, as if it too was listening. That night, while the whole town lay in darkness, one small light refused to die. The rain came sideways now, in furious sheets that stung Elliot's skin and filled his shoes with icy water. He stumbled through the crooked path, calling out, though even his voice was swallowed by thunder. The graveyard loomed ahead, a black sea of crosses and stones, trembling under the storm's rage, and then he saw it. The lantern. It stood on the keeper's post, flame alive, trembling but unbroken. The glass shimmered with streaks of rain, yet inside burned a steady, impossible light. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The world around him was chaos. Trees snapping, mud sliding, and still that small flame refused to die. He ran to it, slipping on the soaked grass. His fingers, numb from cold, wrapped around the metal base. It was warm, almost too warm to hold. Lightning split the sky above, for an instant turning the entire graveyard into a silver ocean. And in that flash, he saw him. The old man. Samuel Reed stood by the gate, coat fluttering like a ghost's wings. His face was calm, unbothered by the storm. The rain didn't touch him. His eyes, kind and endless, met Elliot's through the curtain of water. Elliot's heart pounded. "I thought you were gone!" he shouted, voice cracking through the roar. Samuel smiled faintly. "I told you, boy. The dead don't frighten me." Lightning struck again, closer this time, and Elliot ducked, clutching the lantern to his chest. When he looked up, Samuel had come closer. His outline wavered, like a reflection on the surface of a lake. "You kept the light burning," Samuel said softly. His voice was both near and far, echoing inside Elliot's mind. "Now you understand what it means." Elliot shook his head, rain blinding him. "Understand what?" "That the flame isn't mine," Samuel said. "It never was. It belongs to anyone who remembers." The words hung in the air, heavy, sacred. A gust of wind surged through the trees, bending them low, yet the lantern's fire only danced higher, gold against the black storm. Elliot felt something stir deep inside, a warmth that spread through his chest, pushing back the cold. The light in his hands pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. He looked at Samuel again, but the old man was fading. The rain passed through him now, scattering his image into drifting silver mist. "No!" Elliot cried. "Please don't go!" Samuel's smile deepened. Gentle, proud. "I'm not going anywhere. As long as you carry the light, I'll never be gone." The storm howled once more, then broke apart, thunder rolling into silence. Elliot blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the flame remained, flickering steadily in his trembling hands. He fell to his knees before the keeper's post, the lantern glowing beside him like a living heart. Around him, the rain slowed. The clouds tore open, revealing a fragile silver moon. And for the first time that night, Elliot wasn't afraid. He whispered into the quiet, "Now I understand." The wind carried his words away over the graves, past the iron gate, and into the sleeping town, where one by one candles flickered to life behind darkened windows. The storm had passed, but the fire would never die. By morning, the sky was pale and bruised, streaked with the last trails of storm clouds. Elliot trudged home, his clothes still damp, the lantern tucked safely in his arms. The flame inside had dimmed to a soft glow, steady, calm, alive. When he reached the small cottage, he found the door slightly open. A faint scent of lavender drifted through the room. On the table, beside a cold cup of tea, lay a single folded letter, his name written on it in shaky cursive. Elliot. He hesitated before picking it up. The paper was thin and worn, the ink smudged in places, as if written with trembling hands. "My dear Elliot, if you are reading this, it means the storm has passed. I knew you would go to him. You remind me so much of myself all those years ago. When I was a girl, maybe your age, a storm just like yours came through our town. I was caught in it, frightened, soaked, certain I'd never find my way home. But then I saw a light in the graveyard, steady and warm through the rain. A man stood beside it, the keeper, Samuel Reed. He took my hand, led me through the darkness, and kept me safe until morning. When I told my parents what happened, they said Samuel had been gone for years. I never saw him again. But every time the wind howls, I think I hear his lantern swinging in the rain. Take care of the light, Elliot. It has found you for a reason." Ruth Elliot's throat tightened. He read the letter again, tracing the faded ink with his thumb. The house was silent, but in that stillness, he could almost hear the echo of the old man's voice, calm, kind, eternal. He looked toward the window. Outside, the graveyard shimmered in the early light. The storm had washed everything clean. The lantern on his desk flickered softly, golden and alive. Somewhere deep inside, Elliot knew. The flame had chosen him next. The morning came softly, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting gentle patterns on the wooden floor. Outside, the world seemed suspended. The cornfields glistened with dew, and the air carried the scent of wet earth and pine. Elliot stood in the doorway of his grandmother's room. The quilt she'd made decades ago was pulled up to her chest. Her face was calm, almost smiling. One hand rested lightly on the old Bible beside her, the other by her side. Still, warm no longer. He didn't cry at first. He just stood there, listening to the clock ticking on the wall, its rhythm steady, familiar. The same way she used to hum when she cooked breakfast or told him stories by the fireplace. It wasn't until he noticed the little oil lamp on her bedside table, the one she always kept unlit because the keeper's flame is enough for both of us, that something inside him broke. He picked it up, walked outside, and carried it down the narrow path to the cemetery. Mist clung low to the ground, moving gently with his steps. The world was quiet, not empty, but waiting. At the center of the graveyard stood the old lantern, the one that had burned through countless storms and sleepless nights. Its glass was cracked, the metal darkened by time, yet its light still glowed like a heartbeat. Elliot knelt before it. His hands trembled as he lifted his grandmother's lamp. For a moment he hesitated, then leaned forward, touching her wick to the eternal flame. The fire caught instantly, blooming golden. The mist seemed to draw back, giving space to the light. He whispered, voice barely a breath. "Goodbye, Grandma." The wind rustled through the maple trees, scattering leaves across the graves. Somewhere in that sound, he thought he heard her voice, gentle and distant. "Don't be afraid, my love. The light always knows the way home." He stayed there until the morning sun dissolved the mist, until the world returned to motion. Birds singing, crickets chirping again, the quiet hum of life continuing. When he finally rose, Elliot felt no fear, only warmth, only peace. And as he walked back toward the cottage, he glanced over his shoulder once more. The lantern still burned, brighter than he'd ever seen it. For the first time, the cemetery didn't seem like a place of endings. It felt like home. The mist began to gather again that evening. Soft, golden, almost kind. Elliot sat by the lantern, the one he had kept burning since dawn, watching the flame dance in the slow rhythm of the breeze. The cemetery was quiet, yet it didn't feel lonely. It felt alive, breathing through the grass, humming through the stones. Then from behind the veil of fog, a familiar figure appeared. The old man, the lantern keeper. He looked just as Elliot remembered, tall and thin, his coat long enough to brush the ground, his eyes carrying both light and shadow. But this time, he seemed less solid, like the fog itself had shaped him. Each step he took left no mark, and yet the air seemed to tremble gently around him. Elliot stood. "I thought you were gone." The old man smiled, his voice drifting like wind through leaves. "Gone? No, lad. I was only waiting. You had something to learn before I could come back." Elliot looked at the flickering flame. "I kept it lit. For her." "I know," the old man said softly. "And she knows too." He reached out, his translucent hand hovering just above the flame. "You see, the light isn't just for the dead, boy. It's for the living, for those who forget how to find their way through the dark." He looked at Elliot with eyes full of something deeper than time. Not sadness, not joy, but peace. Then, slowly, he took the lantern from its stone base and placed it into Elliot's trembling hands. "You keep it now, boy," he said. "For her, for them, for you." The metal felt warm, though no fire should have burned that hot. The handle pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "But what if I don't know how?" Elliot whispered. The old man smiled again, faint but sure. "You already do. You've faced fear, and you didn't run. You've known loss, and still, you chose kindness. That's all the light ever asks." The fog swirled around them, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke. For a heartbeat, Elliot thought he heard the faint sound of the church bells. Slow, steady, distant. The old man's figure began to fade, the edges of his coat dissolving into the mist. "Keep it burning," he said, voice softer now, almost gone. "When the lost come to you, don't turn them away. Guide them home. That's what it means to keep the light." And then he was gone. Only the wind remained, gentle, whispering through the cemetery. Elliot stood alone with the lantern in his hands, its glow spilling over his face, warm against the cool night. Above him, the clouds parted, revealing a thin crescent moon. For the first time, he didn't feel like a child anymore. He felt like part of something older, a promise kept through generations. He placed the lantern back upon the stone, steadying it, then whispered to the dark, "I'll keep it burning. I promise." The flame fluttered once, as if in answer. And for a moment, Elliot thought he saw two shadows walking side by side in the mist. One small, one tall, both carrying light. The fog thinned, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. Elliot stood alone among the gravestones, the lantern's glow shrinking to a soft golden heartbeat in the dark. The warmth that had filled the air only moments ago now lingered faintly, like the last note of a lullaby. He turned, meaning to go home, but something caught his eye. A grave nearby, one he didn't remember seeing before. The earth around it was newly turned, the grass still damp with rain. Elliot stepped closer, his lantern trembling in his hand. The engraved letters glimmered under the flickering light. Samuel Reed, 1887, 2023. Finally home. For a long while, Elliot couldn't move. His throat tightened. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the realization came, gentle, undeniable. The keeper had stayed until his task was done, until someone else could take the flame. A single drop of rain fell, sizzling softly as it touched the lantern's glass. The flame fluttered, as if bowing farewell. Elliot whispered, "Good night, Mr. Reed." The lantern dimmed. Not extinguished, just softer, calmer, as though it too had found peace. The fog drifted away toward the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of the old man's voice. "Keep it burning." Elliot stood in silence, surrounded by the scent of wet earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, clear and low. And though the flame had faded, the light, that quiet, golden light, remained inside him. Years passed like quiet rivers. Seasons folded over one another, soft as the turning of pages. The small Midwest town changed. New houses rose where fields once grew, and roads cut through the golden corn. But beyond the town's edge, where the fog still lingered and the maples still bent toward the wind, the old cemetery remained, and so did the light. Every night, without fail, a lantern burned by the gate, the same warm golden glow that had once guided a frightened boy through the storm. People began to talk again, just as they had in Ruth's time. "The boy keeps the flame now," they whispered. "Does he ever sleep?" "No one's sure. Funny thing is, he doesn't seem to age." Elliot had grown into a quiet man. His hair carried the faintest silver at the edges, but his eyes held the same soft blue light. Calm, kind, patient. He tended to the graves with gentle hands, clearing the leaves, setting wildflowers by the stones. In the evenings he sat near the lantern and listened to the wind, as though it still carried voices from the past. Sometimes, travelers came by mistake, lost drivers taking the wrong road, or wanderers looking for somewhere to rest. The fog would part for them, leading them toward the soft light by the gate. Elliot would greet them kindly, offering directions, or a thermos of tea, or simply a place to breathe. They often left saying the same thing. "I don't know why, but I feel lighter." He would only smile and nod. That's what the light does. The townspeople noticed too. Those who walked by the cemetery at night swore they felt something, a peace that settled in the chest, a warmth in the air, even in winter. Some said the light never flickered, not even during the fiercest winds. Others claimed they saw shapes in the fog, a woman's silhouette, a soldier's cap, a small child holding a flower, all fading gently as they neared the glow. And in those moments, Elliot would whisper softly to the air, "It's all right. You can rest now." There was no fear in him anymore. The cemetery was no longer a place of endings, but of remembering. Each name on the stone was a story, each shadow a lesson. Sometimes, when he walked through the rows of graves at dusk, he thought of Ruth, her soft voice, her stories by the fire, the way she spoke of kindness as if it were magic. Other times, he thought of Samuel Reed, the lantern keeper who had watched over him when he was too young to understand what it meant to hold light in the dark. Elliot now understood. He wasn't just tending graves, he was keeping memory alive, keeping hope alive. And though the world outside moved faster every year, inside the cemetery the rhythm remained the same. Slow, breathing, eternal. Some nights, children from the town dared each other to peek through the iron gate. They expected ghosts, but instead, they saw Elliot sitting by the lantern, the flame glowing against his face, peaceful as ever. One of the braver ones would sometimes call out, "Mister, aren't you afraid out here?" And Elliot would chuckle softly, just as Samuel once had. "The dead don't frighten me," he'd say. They're only waiting to be remembered. As the children ran back laughing, the fog would close around him again, gentle and warm. The lantern burned steadily on, the same golden light that had once guided him home. And if you stood far enough away on a clear night, you could see it from the edge of town, a single glow in the mist, unwavering. A promise that in this small corner of the world, no one, living or dead, would ever truly be lost. It was a winter night when the traveler arrived, or rather, lost his way to arriving. The highway lights had long vanished behind him, swallowed by fog thick as wool. His phone had died hours ago, and the GPS voice that once guided him had gone silent, leaving only the hum of tires on an unfamiliar road. The man, a weary salesman with too many miles behind him, tightened his coat and peered through the windshield. Nothing. Only fog. Then, just as the panic began to rise in his chest, he saw it. A glow. At first it looked like a reflection, a trick of light through mist. But the glow pulsed gently, like a living thing. A lantern's flame, small and steady, deep within what looked like a cemetery. He hesitated. It didn't make sense. No one should be out here, not this late, not in this cold. But something about that light, calm, golden, unwavering, drew him forward. He parked on the shoulder and stepped out, boots crunching on frozen grass. The fog wrapped around him, cool and damp. As he approached the iron gate, he saw the lantern resting upon a low stone, its flame swaying softly but never bending to the wind. The traveler called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" Only silence answered, though not an empty one. It felt listening. The warmth of the lantern's glow touched his face. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure beyond the mist. Tall, lean, watching quietly from between the graves. But when he blinked, the shape was gone. A sudden peace settled over him, deep and inexplicable. The air smelled faintly of pine, and something older, the scent of rain on stone, of time standing still. He felt no fear, only calm. And then, beyond the fog, he noticed another glow. Far off, down the road, the faint golden light of a window. He turned back once more to the lantern, whispered, "Thank you," and followed the new light. Within minutes, he reached a small roadside inn, one that wasn't on any map. The woman at the counter smiled as he entered, dripping with fog. "You found us, huh?" she said. "That's lucky. Not many folks do after dark." He told her about the lantern, about the light that guided him through the storm of mist. Her smile faded just a little. "There hasn't been a lantern out there for years," she murmured. "Not since old Ruth passed. Folks say her grandson used to tend it, but—" She paused, glancing out the window toward the empty hill. "No one's seen him in a long time." The traveler laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. But something in her tone made him quiet. He went to bed with the image of that flame still glowing in his mind. The warmth, the silence, the peace. The next morning, sunlight poured through the fog, revealing the hill beyond town. Curious, he drove back to the cemetery, or where he thought it had been. There was nothing, no gate, no path, only a field of wild grass and the whisper of wind. He frowned, stepping forward, and there, resting in the dew, was a small brass lantern, cold metal. Yet when he touched it, he felt the faintest trace of warmth. He stood there for a long time, holding it to his chest. The peace returned. Gentle, familiar. Then he smiled, whispered once more, "Thank you," and walked back to his car. As he drove away, a low mist rolled in again, curling around the empty field. And if someone had been watching from afar, they might have seen a faint flicker of gold deep within the haze, a lantern's last goodbye before morning. Years drifted by like quiet breaths. The town grew, and the old cemetery, once forgotten, became a place of gentle pilgrimage. People came not out of fear, but remembrance. They brought flowers, whispered prayers, and left small offerings near an old stone where the grass never grew too wild. No one remembered exactly when the statue appeared, One spring morning, it was simply there, carved from pale stone, standing beneath the maple trees. It was a boy, no older than 12, holding a small lantern in both hands. His expression was calm, kind, as if listening to something only he could hear. The townsfolk called it the Keeper's Boy. At first, it was just a symbol, a tribute to an old story passed down through generations. But then, the rumors began. Travelers swore they saw a faint golden glow inside the lantern after sunset. Children said they'd walked past on stormy nights and seen it shining through the rain, steady and warm. And so, the legend grew. Through snow, thunder, and wind, the little lantern never went dark. Electric lights around town flickered, but that one flame, soft, living, impossibly real, burned on. No wires, no batteries, no tricks. Just light. Sometimes, late at night, those who stood near the statue said they heard a voice. Not loud, not ghostly, just a whisper in the breeze. "You're safe now." People stopped fearing the cemetery altogether. They began to call it the Garden of Light. Couples visited at sunset, children played at the edge of the fog. The air always seemed a little warmer there, the nights a little less lonely. And every evening, as the lantern shimmered alive once more, someone would always pause to watch. And remember, maybe some lights aren't meant to burn to chase the darkness away. Maybe they stay, so we remember love. And in that quiet corner of the world, beneath whispering trees and the endless turning of seasons, the light kept glowing, eternal, gentle, and kind.